Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley. And with me today is my guest, Becky Upchurch. Welcome, Becky. How are you today?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
And me as well. I am looking forward to our topic today. And you are the founder of Higher Good Coaching and really mindset specific coaching. But we're going to be talking about setting boundaries and how to say no without feeling guilt, which I think a lot of us experience, and mindset tools and some things that we can use to help work on our mindset. And so let's dive in. I want for you to share, as I love to have all my guests do, how did this path kind of open for you? What sort of led you in this direction to establish Higher Good Coaching?
So I came into the world of coaching through the world of academia. I was a classroom teacher. I left the classroom to become an instructional coach. I love instructional coaching. And through that journey, I had been trained in cognitive coaching. And I decided I wanted to kind of dig more into the work of coaching. And so that's how I ended up enrolling in an ICF accredited coaching program. And that's kind of where the passion grew from there. Then the business started. And I discovered that as much as I love the coaching in the world of education, I also love so much the coaching in life and the mindset piece, especially because I am fascinated with why we do the things we do and sometimes how our thinking impacts our lives without us even realizing it, and the immense power we have to make change using just our thinking and how we process our experiences.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that kind of journey with us from going to, like you said, the classroom and now to helping people in their life in general. And I think that's awesome. I totally agree with you that our thoughts play such a huge role in how our life plays out. And we often forget that fact. And so this is what we're going to be diving into today is really how our mindset makes a difference in our life. And so let's talk about to start, because I mentioned in the beginning about setting boundaries. And so we hear a lot about setting boundaries and why that's important, but let's talk about that now. Why do you feel like it's so important? And as a people pleaser, how do we begin to say no in a way that kind of doesn't disturb that people pleasing kind of action? And or how do we get rid of people pleasing?
So, the number one tip that I have for all change is we have to start small.
Mhm.
And this sounds very easy, but what I find is many of us, when we try to make very small change, our brain immediately starts screaming at us that it's not enough. And we want to go hard and we want to go big. And then we do, and then we burn out or the motivation peters out. So the key to any change is to start small. And especially when it comes to saying no and setting boundaries, and especially if you've never done that before. So picking one very small, simple thing that you can start with and then building consistency. One of the things that was a game changer for me in terms of how I approach things was learning kind of the key to motivation. I think how often I hear people say, I really want to start going to the gym, but I'm just not motivated. Or I want to really pursue this hobby, but I just don't feel motivated. I don't have the energy, or I make these plans and then I wake up and I'm not motivated. And it's as if this motivation is just out there and we just have to capture it at the right time. And then I remember years ago hearing motivation follows action. And we think that motivation drives action, but the opposite is true. Taking action is what helps us to build the motivation through momentum. And so starting small is what helps us to get going. And then once we get going, and especially when you start saying no, and that, oh my gosh, the world isn't going to end like I thought it was, or people aren't going to hate me the way I've always assumed, then it starts to feel okay. And you start to say, okay, I did it once, let me try it again. Or maybe it's, I did it in this one situation where it's a little more comfortable. Now let me try it with this person that maybe it's a little harder to say no to. So that's kind of my secret to entering the playing field when it comes to saying no and setting boundaries.
Yeah, Becky, you made some great points in there. Starting small. I have had a number of guests on in variety of fields, nutrition, exercise, health, mental well-being, all of that. And everyone has said, start small. Because you're right, we just think we have to go hard, and that is a great idea, but we do get burnt out so easily because it's overwhelming. And so starting small, again, great reminder to begin with something little and give it a go. And so you build up that muscle, if you will, and then you can do it again. And you mentioned also in there about I tried it in this one area. Now let me try it in this other area. And I think that I want to dig into that because sometimes we can maybe do this in our personal life, but when it comes to work, that's like an entirely different thing. And so, what are your thoughts on how to manage that maybe in workplace?
So I think that there's kind of two key pieces here. And one of them is reframing the mindset. So really thinking about what is the thinking that's causing the action or inaction. So if I'm afraid to say no to somebody at work, whether it be a colleague who's asking for help or a boss who wants me to stay late 3 nights a week when I want to be home with my family, really thinking about what exactly is my thought that's keeping me afraid? Is it, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired? Or is it, oh, I'm not going to get that promotion? Or is it, I'm going to not be seen as a team player? Or is it that person is going to like me less? So, really narrowing in on what is the fear that's behind it so that I can start to maybe shift and reframe that thinking. For example, if there's a team that's working on a project and it's, oh, we all are going to stay late on Friday night to make sure this project gets done before the weekend. And maybe I have plans on Friday night, but I don't want to rock the boat. Do I just say yes and cancel my plans? Or do I say, hey, I would love to stay late on Friday night, but I have these plans. Let's task me with something and I can get that done on Saturday morning because I'm actually okay working on Saturday so that we get it done by Monday. But if I can identify, oh, maybe my motivation is not being accepted, I can potentially find a workaround. Or if I need to set a hard limit on something, recognizing that, oh, I'm worried that I'm going to be excluded. Is that really true? Are my colleagues going to exclude me from going to lunch if I turn down staying late one night because I have a family commitment? That's probably not very realistic. So sometimes when we dig into what the fear is or what we're perceiving might happen, to be honest, I know sometimes for me, my brain likes to just tell me ridiculous things. And so sometimes if I could take a step back and say, oh, that's just ridiculous, that's not going to happen, it can be a simple fix. But sometimes it's a little more complicated and you might worry, especially if it's somebody who has a position of power over you. And I can actually give an example from my own life. Recently, I do various things. I always joke that I'm a coach and I wear multiple hats in the world of coaching. And one of them is I sometimes will do consulting work as a coach. And I recently had something come up where I was asked to take on a task. And it was kind of an unexpected last minute thing. And at first, I thought there had been some type of confusion. And then I realized, oh no, this was actually directed toward me. And I had to say no. And I just explained, oh, sorry, wasn't something that I had planned for. And I didn't have the bandwidth. And the person responded, and their response was to express disappointment. And not in a threatening way or an unkind way, but my instant reaction was, oh my gosh, they're disappointed in me and I need to fix this. Can I shuffle some things? Can I figure out a way to fit it in? But then I stopped and I was like, no, they didn't say they're disappointed in me. They said they're disappointed to not have me be a part of this. But maybe that's because I'm valuable and my opinions are valuable. And I have a lot of worth and I bring a lot to the table, which is kind of the other piece of it. When we can remember the value that we bring to a team, to an organization, to a job, to a boss, I think it makes it easier to set those boundaries because we're not constantly thinking, oh, if I say or do the wrong thing, I'm going to get in trouble. No, people who are in positions of authority for the most part know that they need to treat the people who bring value. And so if I need to set a limit because I need to spend time with my family or I'm going out of town, so I'm not going to be available for that meeting, then that's just, hey, sorry, I can't do this, but kind of also say in my head in the background, I'm valuable. So this is going to be okay.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you so much for going into that detail because I think the listeners need, and myself as well, need to be reminded that we've got to look at what is our thoughts around what we're hearing or what is being said to us, because that makes a difference in our reaction and our response. And so, there's great points in there. I love it. And thinking about perhaps what could I shuffle and where do I need to say, no, this just isn't going to happen. And here's why, or maybe not even giving a reason why. And like you said, because what I bring is valuable and I am worthwhile and you're just going to accept it. That's awesome. So let's talk now about women specifically, because I think that we tend to have difficulty saying no without feeling guilty.
Yes.
And I think this ties into we are worried about people liking us or being excluded. And so let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, we tend to think as human beings in general, we are wired for connection. And I think especially women, because many of us are just naturally nurturers. And I also think from a cultural lens, we are raised that women are caretakers, right? Women care for their spouses, they care for their children. And not that men don't do those things. You watch things on television, things in movies, there's often female characters who are carrying the weight of many hurts. And so I think so many of us are socialized with these ideas. And sometimes we don't even realize that we have them, but they are there under the surface and they play a part in how we interact. And one of the biggest things that I think of as a myth that needs to be dispelled is the idea that people will like you less when you have boundaries and when you say no. And I think that this is very common that people worry about this. And I think it's also one of the biggest lies that we've been told or we tell ourselves. Because when somebody says yes to things that they don't want to say yes to, and they show up, I believe 1,000% that they do not show up as their best selves. So if I'm showing up doing something because I'm afraid to say no to you, but I really want to be anywhere else but here or doing anything but this, whether I think I'm showing it or not, on some level, I'm going to feel unhappy. I'm going to feel resentful. And then you're not getting the best version of me. So the connection that I'm making with you in that space and in that moment is not a true connection. It's a connection that it has resentment on one side or has frustration on one side or stress on one side. And the other person has no idea. And what kind of true connection, friendship is that? So I think just recognizing that we are actually doing a disservice to our relationships when we force ourselves to do things that we don't want to do, or we put ourselves in situations where we're unhappy. And if we could just be a little bit more open and willing to set those limits, even with the people closest to us, they will receive them. Sometimes it's hard at first, and that's kind of part of the process is learning how to navigate pushback. And that's one of the things I talk to people about. Anticipate that people will be uncomfortable with boundaries if you haven't set them before, and make that a part of your planning process. But in the long term, I really do believe that it helps to strengthen your relationships. And I also think that people have a lot of respect for people who set boundaries because you're showing other people that it's okay.
Good stuff. Thank you, Becky. That was great. The point that you made about when you're doing something where you don't want to be doing it, and whether you think that they don't realize it, you still are putting off an energy that I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. And you may have a smile on your face, but it's still coming across in a way that people are receiving it. This is not quite right here. Even if we don't know, like on a verbal level, we're still feeling it. And so I think that's 100%. accurate with that description, that we're putting that out there, even if we don't think we are. And the point about being prepared for the pushback, if you're dealing with somebody who maybe you've never said no to before and is expecting you to, I think that is such a great point, is being prepared and how you're going to handle that. I think that makes such a difference in being able to continue that new pattern of behavior going forward.
And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. Sometimes I'll hear people talk about it's so hard to set boundaries. I would argue that setting a boundary is actually very easy. It's holding the boundary where most of us have the problem. Because I can be like, okay, I've got this boundary, I'm going to set it. But then as soon as I get a little bit of pushback, it's, okay, this must be a bad boundary, or okay, I'll just make this exception. So that's kind of where, to me, the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And so to go into it saying, okay, I know when I set this boundary, this person's going to say this, or this person's going to do this. How do I want to respond in that moment? And if I know the answer to that, then I can show up in that way, as opposed to I'm not prepared and I'm just reacting in the moment. And often when we react in the moment, we end up just kind of caving because we want to keep peace.
Yeah, that's a great point. And or we're so wishy-washy. So it's okay, maybe I'll just do it this one more time. And so it's just, the idea is there. You want to set the boundary, but you're not prepared for that. And then that wishy-washy behavior, and you're just like, oh, okay, sure. And cave, like you said. So great points. Do you have some tips then that you could share maybe with the listeners on being prepared? Like, how do you be prepared? Thoughts on getting your mind to handle that?
Yes, I think the first thing is really understanding the purpose of a boundary, because I think often we think that we are setting boundaries to change the experiences we have with other people. And sometimes that happens as a result, and sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes people are going to show up the way they're going to show up, even if we tell them we don't like it. So, for example, if I were to say to you, Desiree, I go to bed really early. And so when you call me at 10 o'clock at night, it's really disruptive because I actually have my phone next to me. And I would really appreciate it if you didn't do that anymore. You could say, okay, I hear you. And then you could call me at 10 p.m. every night for the rest of your life. And I couldn't stop you because you are an autonomous human. And that is how the system works, right? People can hear what you're saying and still choose to do something else, especially in a case where somebody might think, oh, it's not a big deal. I used an example over the holidays of if somebody's trying to watch what they eat and they have a family member who is what I like to call a food pusher. Oh, you should have this, you should have this. And the person says, oh, no, thank you. And the person just keeps pushing. You can say to somebody, I really don't like it when you keep offering me food. But if that's in their nature, it might just happen anyway. So recognizing that, hey, just because I set a boundary doesn't mean it's going to be respected. So how do I want to respond? And what am I going to do? So it might be, in the case of the phone thing, it might just be, okay, I'm just going to put the phone on silent and I'm not going to answer the phone. And I'm going to assume it's not an emergency because we've had this conversation. And if that bothers you that oh, you used to take my phone calls anytime I called and now you don't, then that's a conversation we can have, or that's something you're just going to have to navigate. But I can choose how I respond to it. Or again, I'll use the example of going to a family gathering. And let's say somebody in your family loves to gossip about other people in the family and it makes you uncomfortable. And maybe you've decided to express that. And you've decided that your boundary is, I don't want to be a part of gossip anymore. You can say, Aunt so and I really don't like hearing gossip about other people. And she may continue to do it. I can't stop her, but what can I do? Am I going to choose to leave the room? Am I going to choose to no longer visit that person? Am I going to choose to just continuously respond with something completely unrelated to what's being talked about until the conversation shifts? Am I going to pull somebody else into the room and have them start a conversation with me? I can consider all different kinds of possibilities of what I might do in that situation so that if and when that situation comes, it would be great if I say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. I'd love to change the subject. And she says, sure, let's change the subject. But if she just keeps doing what she's doing, I get to choose how to respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said in there about people are autonomous and they're going to do what they're going to do, and we can't control them or what they're going to do. My gosh, we all know this intellectually, but we still want to try to change other people and other people's behaviors, and it never works.
Mhm.
But what we can do is change ourselves and make different choices for how we're going to handle, right? Leave the room, pick a new topic, bring somebody else in, like you said. All of these things are great options. But again, it comes down to what we're doing, not trying to make somebody else do something or not do something.
And sometimes I'll hear people say things like, I'm going to set a boundary so that this person stops doing such and it's that's not how this works. You're going to set a boundary so that if and when this person does such and you can decide how to be at peace with it. And just another quick strategy I'll share for dealing with pushback. I tend to be a pretty direct communicator. So sometimes I'll just directly communicate. But I know sometimes people are really uncomfortable saying things super directly, especially in certain contexts. I also find that humor can be very effective.
Mm.
If you're around that person that gossips all the time, make it a joke about, well, gee, I'd hate to hear what you say about me when I'm not here. Huh? And then just kind of, again, ease into a different conversation. That way, if you're afraid to just be like, hey, I really don't like that you're a constant gossip and you feel like that's rude, you can just make a little joke of it and then decide how you want to move forward.
Yeah, great tip. Humor can be a really good strategy
And
in some cases. It's not always the best way to handle it, but I think it is a good strategy in some cases. So let's talk about where you think that people get it wrong in terms of setting boundaries. Or, yeah, maybe what's one thing you think that people kind of get wrong?
I think the biggest is just that idea of a tool to kind of navigate the way other people behave. And I think that once you kind of really internalize that, this is a tool for me to bring myself a sense of peace. I think that's like the number one. I think the other thing that people sometimes get wrong is that once I've set a boundary, I don't have to set it again. I think it's often a recursive process. And that's why I say pick one thing, one area, one person, whatever, and practice that until you start to build like that muscle memory. And I loved that you used that in framing earlier because I use that sometimes as well, because it's like anything. It's you have to build the muscle and then you can transfer it to other areas. But I think sometimes we think, oh, once the boundary's set, the work is done. Or, oh, once I've had this one experience, the work is done. And it's with most things in life. Very few things in life are a one and done. Pretty much when it comes to human interaction, especially, there's a lot of recursive behaviors and things that you may have to navigate through more than once. But I also find that the more you navigate through these situations, the more comfortable you get, the more you build that muscle, and the more that it really just becomes a part of how you interact with people.
Yeah, good stuff. I think that we all would like it to be as easy as just saying it one time and it never happened again, but that never happens. And
Right.
practicing until it becomes a second nature to you is really the key. And building that muscle again, like that practice that you're doing it over and over again so you get more comfortable, but it becomes easier to do in the future is the key there. So let's talk about switching gears a little bit, talking about how we can overcome maybe some feelings of guilt around setting boundaries, or maybe if there's shame perhaps involved in it. What are your thoughts on that? How can we kind of overcome that?
Yeah, I think that, again, it goes down to what are our thoughts? Because our thoughts are what generate our feelings. So if I'm feeling guilt and I'm feeling shame, it's not because of the action of what I've done. It's because how my brain is interpreting that action. So if I say no to someone and I'm feeling, oh, I can't believe I said no to that person. I should have said yes. There's usually something else in my brain that's telling me maybe it's, oh, I'm a bad friend because I didn't say yes to meeting that friend for coffee, even though I'm exhausted. Or maybe I'm a bad daughter because I didn't do that favor for my mom because I didn't have time. Or maybe I'm not a good employee because I didn't stay late 3 nights this week. So, what is the thought that is driving the feeling? Because that's the only way that we can really shift out of that thinking. But the thing that I find very interesting, and I've experienced this a lot in my own life, is often we don't know right away what the thought is.
Mm.
So I talk all the time about with mindset work, there's what I like to think of as kind of the top level thoughts that I have an awareness of. So maybe something's frustrating me, and I can kind of tell you if you're like, why are you frustrated? I can kind of fire off two or three things that I'm thinking. But then if you said, now list 12 more, and I started listing 12 more, eventually something would pop up where I would go, oh, what is that? Where'd that come from? And sometimes it's those lower thoughts that I like to think of as like the like beneath the surface hidden things that sometimes is what's keeping us caught up. That's what's making us feel that guilt or that shame or that frustration. So really taking the time to look at a situation and say, okay, if I'm feeling guilty about this, so let's say a friend invited me out for coffee and I said no because I had too much of my own stuff going on and I just felt like I didn't have the bandwidth. And then after the fact, I started thinking I should have said yes. I feel like a bad friend. I would just write on the top of a piece of paper, coffee with my friend. And then I'd do a bulleted list of, okay, what's coming up? I should have gone. I'm not a good friend. I could have made time and just everything and just spend a couple minutes doing that and see what comes up. And eventually there's going to be something in there that jumps out at me. And then that's the thought that I'm going to interrogate. So maybe it's going to be something like, people can't depend on me.
Mm.
And I'm going to go, oh, I didn't really think about that, but apparently I am thinking that. So then I'm going to start going, is it really true? Am I really somebody who's not dependable? Because I'm pretty sure if you asked my 10 closest people, they would tell you that I am. I'm pretty sure my boss would tell you I'm a go to. When I can start really, okay, that thought's not really true. So it's something that's making me feel shameful. I'm not a dependable person. And that's something I pride myself on. And so the more that we can kind of find those source thoughts that are causing the emotions and really decide it's true. And in a lot of cases it isn't, but also something that I was taught to ask that I think is really powerful. Is this helpful?
Mm.
Because sometimes we get so caught up in what is true or false, what is right or wrong. And is this thought serving me? And if it's not, then how do I want to shift my thinking? Is there another way to look at this situation so that I can kind of let myself off the hook when it comes to those feelings of guilt or regret?
Yeah, excellent. I love what you said, the source thoughts. And we have to do a little bit of digging to get to those. And it sounds like really just being curious about what are these thoughts. As you said, listing them out with some pen and paper. I think that's a great tip. And you know what? It just made me think of an iceberg and how those two or three things that you can say right from the start, that's the top that you see above the water, right? And then the rest of it is all under the water and you don't see. But it's when you take the time to really get curious and think about all these things, then you'll discover those and find that source thought. And I love that idea of the source thought. And what is that thing that popped up for you that you're suddenly like, oh, that's interesting. I never would have realized that, whatever it is. And so that is
Yeah.
so cool. I love that. I'm curious, Becky, and share with us why you're so passionate about this topic, mindset and setting boundaries and all of this kind of work.
There's a lot of pieces to my answer. For me, I am somebody who I think for a long time, I worried a lot what other people thought. And as I got older, and I think this happens for a lot of women, as you get older, you start to realize how much you care what other people think and how much of a frustration it can be. I think for me, it's also I love supporting women. And one of the things that I've said before, and I'll say it again, is I truly believe that women are so immensely powerful and they have the power to change the world, like individually, but also in mass. The problem is, I think a lot of us get caught up in a lot of things that we don't need to be caught up in. That takes a lot of our mental bandwidth. It takes a lot of our time. It takes a lot of our energy. And that is hugely frustrating to me. It's hugely frustrating to me when I see women who have big dreams, who are not pursuing those dreams because they have a to-do list full of pieces of other people's dreams.
Mm.
And so to me, this work is about giving people permission to prioritize themselves and helping people to understand that you are not a selfish human being for doing things for yourself. I think that I am somebody who has immensely strong boundaries and has zero problem saying no. But I think I am also somebody who is very compassionate and very loving. And I sometimes feel like that's probably why I'm able to be compassionate and loving, because I've gotten to a place where I can say no to things. And so I'm not resentful of people. I'm not resentful of situations. And I want that for people. When I hear people saying, and again, especially women, oh, I have to do this and I have to do this and I have to do this, or I'm so stressed and I'm so tired. And then you hear how they're spending their time, and none of it is stuff that's bringing them joy. None of it is stuff that's chasing their goals or even necessarily aligned with the things that matter most to them. And so I think that to me is kind of the driving force.
Yeah. My gosh, Becky, that was awesome. And I agree with you. I feel like we, as women, as mothers, if we are lucky enough to have children, tend to put everybody else's needs before our own. And so our dreams and goals often get set to the side until everybody else's stuff is handled. And so, as we see, we reach midlife. So many women by midlife get to this point where they're like, okay, you know what? It's my time. And I'm going to do what I want to do now. And I've done enough for everybody. It's time for me. What are your thoughts on perhaps how do we get there before midlife?
I think one of the things that I like as an example is I had a coach years ago that I had worked with talked about, I think it was in relation to setting and achieving big goals, and that her driving force sometimes was kind of like seeing what she was capable of and seeing what was possible, and then also showing other people. And I think that's something to think about even when we're young, to kind of shift the lens from like a strong woman takes care of everyone. Because I think for a lot of us, that's what we're taught. It means to be a good woman. I'm a caretaker. Like you said, I prioritize my children. I prioritize my partner. I prioritize my family. I prioritize everybody else's stuff. But what if we saw it a different way? What if we saw it as a powerful woman is willing to prioritize herself, and she's willing to serve as a model for other women and young women and her children and everybody else's children of what is possible and what is allowable. Because again, I think so much of it is the messaging that we receive, even when we don't realize we're receiving it. And sometimes it is the messaging we receive from watching our mothers or watching our grandmothers or watching the lady down the street, or just kind of seeing how women are portrayed in the media. And it's just the idea that we can go after things that we want without being selfish. And I think it's also about teaching young women, or even teaching ourselves before we're in midlife, that we can find a balance. Because I think that's the other piece of it, is so often there are so many things on the list that I can't possibly have time for my stuff and your stuff. But sometimes I also feel like we're navigating the list completely wrong. And there's things on the list that don't even need to be on the list. And there are things on the list that other people can take on. So again, starting to look more critically at not only what are my perceptions of what it means to be a good woman, for lack of a better term, but also what are my perceptions of how I can approach my life. And people talk all the time about, oh, you need to find balance and balance. Balance isn't all things in balance all the time. Balance to me is sometimes certain things are prioritized, sometimes other things are prioritized. And certainly, if somebody says, I just prefer to live a life where I'm completely focused on the needs of others over myself, and that is my preference, I'll honor that, because I believe that, again, we're autonomous humans and we have choices. Where I struggle is if somebody is living a life where they're saying, I'm prioritizing everybody but myself and it's making me miserable. and I don't know how to get out of this. And I just want anybody who feels that way to know that, again, there are baby steps that we can take that can start to shift us in a new direction.
Yeah, good stuff. Becky, the point that you made about things that are on the to-do list that don't even need to be on the to-do list or the priority list, it's so true. Or somebody else could be handling them. It's absolutely. But I feel like you shared, so often see modeled for us a certain type of behavior and expectations. And so, having grown up a certain way, we think this is how we have to do it going forward. And this is how we be a good mom, a good wife, a good whatever. And so, it's such a great reminder to look at what is important and what needs to be prioritized, what needs to be perhaps handed off to somebody else, and making those decisions. And I think that's such a great reminder for us all. Love it.
Yeah, I recently actually did like a reel just talking about how we navigate a to-do list and ways to categorize tasks and really prioritize, because I think that's another piece of the puzzle with, I think about the relationship between yes and no. And this is a concept that I've really been noodling on a lot lately. And it's just the idea, like, why is no so important to me? Why are boundaries so important to me? Because every no is an opportunity for a yes. So everything I can say no to that doesn't serve me, that I don't want, creates space for me to say yes to something that I do want and that does serve me. And being really discerning about the choices that we make and how we spend our time and energy helps to create more of those yeses.
Absolutely. And there is a quote, and I probably won't get it right, but basically it's what you're saying. If I say no to this, that opens up space for me to say yes to this. And that is brilliant and really so simple, but we often just lose that, I think, in day to day when we're going about our lives and not remembering that's the case. We are choosing one thing over another when we say no to something or yes to something, right?
And I think sometimes just that permission that we can say no to things is a powerful starting point. And I feel like the more of us that start to do it and model it for those around us, the more we kind of start a revolution of no.
I love it. I always ask my guests what books they feel are beneficial or have been helpful that they want to share with the listeners. And so at this point, Becky, is there some that you'd like to share with us now?
Would love to. So, a book that I love and have come back to multiple times is Tara Moore's Playing Big. And it's funny because when you read that title, Playing Big, I think to me it speaks to instantly, oh, it played big. I've got to do big things. And we talked about sometimes the beauty of the small. But the reason I love this book is because she talks about how we define what playing big is and the importance of defining it for ourselves. And that my playing big may be a traditional form of playing big, or it may be something that's my version of playing big that maybe society doesn't define as playing big. And it's a great guide for navigating so many things in mindset and for really living into our values. I could talk about the book all day. Tara's an author, but she's also a coach. She does courses. I've taken courses with her, and she's just like, you go into a Zoom room with her, and I automatically feel her Zen present. Playing Big, if you have not read that book, it is a great one. Another book that I'm actually in the process of reading, I started it and I kind of put it away and I come back to it, is the book Professional Troublemaker by Lovey Ajayi Jones. And there's so many good nuggets. And I think the title really says a lot. I love that idea of good trouble, making good trouble. And I think that's a good book for anybody that kind of speaks to. And then my third book, which is a book that I'm sure nobody has mentioned and probably never will mention, is actually a children's book. And it was one of the 12 original Little Golden books. And it's a book called The Pokey Little Puppy. And I tell people all the time, The Pokey Little Puppy remains one of my favorite books. When people have children, I buy them this book. And it's a book about this group of puppies. And this one puppy is constantly escaping and getting in trouble. And yet he keeps escaping and getting in trouble. For years and years, I just loved that book as a kid. It never hit me until recently that I love that book because you could not tell that puppy how to live its life. It was like they kept telling the puppy, these are the rules. This is what you're supposed to do. Like, fall in line. And that puppy was just like, I'm going to go do what I know I need to do, and then I'll find my way back. And to me, that kind of speaks to the power of mindset and to really focus on, hey, the world may tell me that this is what a good life looks like, or the world may tell me that this is the right path. But at the end of the day, we get to choose. And I also believe that we all have an inherent wisdom inside of us that will help us make those decisions if we learn to listen to it.
Yeah, excellent recommendations, Becky. Thank you for sharing those. And you're right, the golden book, I never would have thought that would be a recommendation, but what a fabulous story and a great gift, absolutely, for people who are having children, because teaching them from the start that they know the direction that their life needs to go and they don't have to listen necessarily to what society or other people are telling them is the way to go is a lesson that I think all of us need to remember. Yeah,
For sure.
love it. Is there any podcasts that you would like to share with us that you think are beneficial or that you enjoy?
Yes. So I will, first of all, I will say if anybody out there has a coach and your coach records coaching calls, I highly recommend listening to them. I am actually in several coaching memberships that include recorded calls. So one of the number one things I listen to as a podcast is replays of coaching calls, because I think it's good sometimes to have the reminders in your ear. So that's just a little fun fact. I recently discovered a podcast, and I won't drop the F bomb, but it's Do You Effing Mind is the name of the podcast. And I stumbled upon it. I was actually listening to a different podcast, and the woman who does this podcast was interviewed. And I enjoyed her interview so much that I went and looked up her podcast. And it talks about neuroscience, but also it's like how to understand your brain and basically change your life. And it's super empowering. And I believe she's in Australia. I feel like I've listened to a bunch of episodes recently since I discovered her. And there's always these little nuggets. And I'm like, oh, I feel like this is somebody I could hang out with. And she's speaking my language. That's a good one. Another one that I've recently gotten into and on. With a lot of podcasts, it's I'll listen to one and be like, oh, I love this episode. And then there might be a topic that I'm like, ah, it's not my topic. But I find that Mel Robbins has some really good topics on the Mel Robbins podcast. So that's one that I've started listening to this past year that I've been enjoying. So she's got some good nuggets. And the thing I like, I actually was sharing with somebody when I first discovered the podcast. I was like, I'm so confused. I was like, I feel like this podcast is so popular and people are like, this is groundbreaking. But it's like this concept that I'm familiar with. And I'm like, doesn't everybody know this? And then I was like, oh, no, they don't. I sometimes forget that when you are around coaches all the time and you're in that world, I think I tend to maybe sometimes take for granted certain things. And so it's a really good reminder when I listen to her that, hey, sometimes we do need to be reminded of the simple things. And so I've really been enjoying her recently.
Oh, yeah. I love her podcast. It is fantastic, a good show. And she does have excellent guests for sure. And what you just shared about, oh, but doesn't everybody know this? And how often do we, whatever it is that we do on a consistent basis, we think everybody knows, right? Like,
Mhm.
I know how to use Excel. Doesn't everybody know how to use Excel? You know what I mean? But no, not everybody does. And
Yeah.
so it's a great show in that you can maybe learn things you didn't know, or maybe have things reiterated to you that you need to hear again. And yeah, good stuff. So thank you for sharing those with us. And I'll, of course, include that information in the show notes for the listeners to easily find the books and the podcasts. And then lastly, Becky, if people have questions for you, they want to dig in a little bit more on mindset and all of this that we've just talked about, how would they be able to find you? Would be follow along with the work that you're doing? Are you on Instagram, Facebook? What would you say about that?
So I am on both Instagram and Facebook. My Facebook business page is Hire Good Coaching. It's hire with a GH. And then on Instagram, I am Becky Upchurch _. And so I reside in both of those places. And also, if people wanted to shoot me an email, it's Becky@highergoodcoaching.com. And I'm always excited to connect with folks. I tell people all the time I used to do on, I don't know if you're familiar with Clubhouse. It was a social audio app that got, pretty popular during the pandemic. And I used to do a Saturday morning mindset room. And I would tell people like, DM me if there's things you want to ask about or if you want to suggest topics. And there would be people that wouldn't want to talk in the audio room, but would message me. And I feel like we always had great conversation and people were always just so kind and supportive. So I always welcome the engagement.
Love it. I do remember that app that you're sharing. My husband was a fan as well, and so would sit in a lot of different topics there. But thank you so much, Becky, for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and this information with us and the tips and the tricks and the things that you have shared, I think is so huge. And the takeaway that I think all of us can have is be curious, really look at why we have these thoughts. Where are they coming from? And just kind of remain curious and think about those things. I think that's huge. And so I love it. Thank you so much for your time and coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And if I could just leave one final thought for anybody who's listening, if there's anybody who is thinking, oh, but it's different for me, I can't say no, I can't make those shifts, just try it. Just try it. Take some baby steps. I think you would be amazed at what you can accomplish if you just give yourself a chance.
Excellent. Thank you so much for closing out the show that way. That was brilliant. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
We'll talk more soon.
Bye.
Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.